A little tired, heart rate, right? Elevated, activated. That's that fight or flight response, right? You can take a seat. You can take a seat, right? And we have control over when it's the bear and we're running and we're exercising, right? But when it's the emotions, when it's the abuse, when it's the scary thing in our life that we really can't put words to, we don't have control over it. Everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. And if you're able, I want you to jog in place. Jog in place. Jog in place. Jog in place. Yes. Now go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. Now imagine there's a bear behind you. There's a bear chasing you, and it's about to eat you up. Everybody, yes, run. You gotta run. That's a bear behind you. You gotta run. Run. All right, now everybody stop. What do you notice in your body right now? If I was a different child, then maybe he wouldn't have to be in the streets and do that. If I was a different child, maybe she would be happy and smile and say she loves me. Spoken to a couple of people, and I'm just so excited to be here with y'all. But I want to first thank PE Partners for putting this on and for giving us this information, this education, and this knowledge. So can we give it up for Amber, for Carly, for the folks at PE Partners? Thank you.
Reggie D stands as an award-winning entrepreneur, best-selling author, dynamic keynote speaker, and mental health advocate. As the author of Perseverance Through Severe Dysfunction, Reggie leverages his expertise in developmental intergenerational trauma to foster environments supporting resilience, mental wellness, emotional development, and healthy relationships. With a decade of experience in finance and accounting, he founded Rose Street Wealth Management, driven by his passion for helping others achieve financial freedom. Recognized for his contributions, Reggie has been honored as one of National Business Journal's 40 Under 40, National's Top 30 Under 30, was featured in Top 100 People in Finance magazine, and nominated for Forbes 30 Under 30. His insights have been featured in prestigious media outlets including Forbes, Best Colleges, ESPN, and USA Today. As a resilience and wellness architect, Reggie employs evidence-based methods to manage mental health issues, promote well-being, and foster resilience. He provides psychoeducation, mindfulness, and embodiment techniques to address these issues effectively. Reggie holds his bachelor's and master's degrees from Vanderbilt University, where he was a D1 student athlete on the football team. In addition to speaking, he is also a trauma-informed certified yoga instructor, mental health first aider, and is a first childhood experiences aware certified. Reggie currently lives in Nashville, Tennessee with his wife Katie and their Rottweiler Lizzie. Please join me in welcoming Reggie D.
She made all that up. If you can hear, say persevere. Persevere. If you can hear, say persevere. I love it. Y'all got energy this morning, and it looks like this has been a fantastic conference. I've spoken to a couple of people, and I'm just so excited to be here with y'all. But I want to first thank PE Partners for putting this on and for giving us this information, this education, and this knowledge. So can we give it up for Amber, for Carly, for the folks at PE Partners? Thank you. Yes, and I want you to thank yourselves and give a hand for yourselves because you care, right? You care about the well-being of folks that you support. You care about your own well-being enough to stay here on this Friday after this long week of all these sessions. So give it up for yourselves for sticking around and being here. And mental health is very important to me, right? Mental health became real for me not that long ago, maybe about 5 years ago, where I was impacted by the unaddressed mental health issues in my life. And I see that so often in so many areas of life. And for our first responders, dealing with the things that they deal with on a daily basis, with the lives that they have to live to support other people and saving their lives and being there during traumatic times and the worst times of people's lives. And their mental health takes a toll when all of that comes. And you all, being leaders, being those people who are supporting them. You want to help them build the resilience to deal with the stresses that come with their jobs. And then the stresses that come with going home, and it may still be stressful, and coming back, and it's just never no peace, never any rest in that. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the different challenges that are faced, but then also we're going to talk about ways that we can support them, strategies that you can take with you, that you can employ, and that can help better the well-being and mental health of those that you support. All right, but first, we'll start with a story. I like to think of myself as a storyteller more than anything. She said dynamic keynote speaker. She made that up. I'm a storyteller. And so I like to tell a story about why it matters. That's what I'm telling the story about first. Right, and I'm not good at remembering stats. I did a lot of math in school, and I dropped all of that when I got out of school. And so I'm going to sit up here, and we're going to read that. But why it matters, right? Why does mental health matter? 30% first responders develop behavioral health conditions, including depression and PTSD, compared to 20% of the everyday population, right? That's a big number. Depression and PTSD are 5 times more common in first responders than the general population. Again, due to that stress that they see on a daily basis. Depression and 85% of first responders report symptoms of mental health conditions. 85%, right? And I would bet that number is probably 100% for folks who didn't report what they really were feeling inside or didn't know what they were feeling inside. And I put those in white because those are the symptoms that are shown, that we see, that we diagnose folks with. But the underlying issues is the attitude, the treatment, the mindsets of us as a society, as a community, of how we treat mental health. 70% of EMS workers never seek mental health services. And you're going to see some stats later on about EMS workers and the issues that they're facing, but 70% of them don't even go and get help for it. Why is that, right? Some of them, many of them, fear that they'll get a negative response. 57%. And a large number of them fear that they will be degraded, demoted, fired because they bring up an issue that they're dealing with. That may mean they need to take some time away from work. That may mean they need to change some things about how they show up at work. So they're terrified to come out and talk about these things. But we know for them to be their best selves, for them to show up and be the superheroes that they are, they need to get the support that they need. And I thought this was significant as well. 69% of EMS providers report not having enough time between traumatic events to recover and process, right? And that's every day. Every day is a traumatic event for them. Every day is hard work, a hard life. And those things in the yellow, right? That's about the attitude. That's about some things that we can control. How can we make it more acceptable for people to talk, to speak up, to go get help, so that we don't see the stats that we see at the top. So we don't see some of the other stats that we're going to see later on in this, right? And I avoided it. I avoided it my entire life, up until I couldn't anymore. You see, I found myself lying in a fetal position on a cold hardwood floor, crying my eyes out as my wife tried to console me. I just got Rosie. She was a puppy at the time. And I was laying there and I was playing with her for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it went to laughing and then crying and then yelling and whispering, and I was so delusional. I didn't know where I was. Right? All of these emotions came bottling up. I was overwhelmed by depression, grief, anxiety. It was eating away at me. And I had this moment where I looked at myself on that floor and I asked, how in the world did you end up here? How in the world did you end up here? Because from the outside looking in, all the ways that we define success, I had done that. Right? I had overcome the obstacles from my childhood. I had succeeded educationally. I had succeeded in my career. I had done some amazing things, but yet I was lying there miserable. In my childhood, it was marked by a lot of adversity, a lot of trauma. I was born to a 14-year-old mother. 14-year-old mother in the hood, raised in poverty, raised around gangs, raised around drugs. One of my first memories, I was asked on a regular basis to take a little bottle, walk into the bathroom and pee in it so somebody in my family could pass a drug test. That was one of my earliest memories, right? Earliest memories of seeing my grandfather lay his hands on my mother and my grandmother and then associating that with normal, right? Those were the things that I was born into. And then my dad was rarely ever there. My dad turned to the streets. Some of the police officers that work for you all probably were chasing my dad at some point in his life. He liked to run. I don't know why. He wasn't that fast. My dad, he was rarely there. As a young boy growing up, searching for love, connection, right? I craved the attention of my dad, and he wasn't there. He eventually found himself in prison. I was 8 years old. And I remember lying there or sitting and watching the TV that night, and it was the news, and it showed his face, right? Like I got these butterflies in my stomach at first. And then the butterflies turned into pain in my chest as I started to see all the different charges that he was facing, right? Possession with intent to sell, unlawful use of firearm, all of these different things. And then at the bottom, attempted homicide. And I had gotten used to my dad going in and out of jail, being, on work release and having to see him every now and then. But I knew something was going to be different after that. I knew that my life was going to change, but I didn't know to the extent that it was going to change. I didn't know the feelings that I would carry with me for, still to this day, I'm going to be real with y'all, still to this day, as it relates to abandonment, as it relates to rejection, as it relates to just wanting love. So I was there with my mom. My mom she held it down. She was always around physically. But even still, you think about it, a 14-year-old having a child, there's some issues there too in that environment that creates that. And so my mom carries a lot of trauma in her life as well. And that trauma and the way that she was loved and the way that she showed how to love wasn't always the best. So emotionally, we were disconnected as well, just as disconnected as me from my father, who was miles and miles away in prison. But I grew up and I internalized all of those things. Most of the time when children internalize things, it's a lot of negativity. All of these bad things that are happening in the world happen because of me, right? If I was a different child, then maybe he wouldn't have to be in the streets and do that. If I was a different child, maybe she would be happy and smile and say she loves me. If I, that's a normal part of development. Children, they see they see life through their own lenses. They see it as very, very self-centered, not in a negative way, but that's just how we develop. And so I grew up and I internalized these things. And I like to say, I don't like to say it, but it is pretty true that majority of my life was a trauma response. My personality, my work ethic, the perfectionist tendencies that led to all of those accomplishments was a trauma response. I was in school and I did really well in school because I didn't want to upset anyone. I was a people pleaser, trauma response, right? And also I was searching for love. If I couldn't get a hug just for being me, maybe I could get a hug if I brought home an A. Maybe I could get you to smile at me if I scored a couple touchdowns. And so that was my life. Perform, all in an effort to find love. And again, my trauma response was applauded by society. It was looked at and heralded as an amazing thing. Look at what this kid accomplished. Look at what he did from this environment. And it led me to some amazing things. right? I was able to go to a very prestigious private school. And at that school, I didn't know it at the time, but introduced to even more trauma. Right? I was one of the first year, I was the only person who identified as black in my class, and that was a difficult thing coming from the environment that I grew up in. I remember the first introduction to the school was a football game. And I was introduced to the school through a program where I played football for the first time, organized football. It's called Backfield in Motion. Backfield in Motion had this hook of sports. Get kids in to play sports and do it and take care of all the fees and transportation and everything that came with that. But we're going to educate them. We're going to build them up in their character. We're going to help them be better human beings. And so I was in that program, and part of the program was volunteers from this school that I'm talking about. And one of the volunteers just latched on to me. Saw that I was a high achiever in the classroom and saw that I had a good personality, a good attitude. Again, I'm a people pleaser and I'm going to keep on doing, right? So like nobody saw the bad that was living inside of me. He introduces me to this football game. And I walked there and I'm like thousands and thousands of people around this stadium for a high school football game. And little 10-year-old me, the first thing I can think of is, where all these white people come from? Oh man, I grew up in the hood. There weren't that many white people. But I was a couple miles away from my house, right? And that was just the stark contrast in neighborhoods and different places, right? But it opened my eyes. It opened my eyes to a totally different world. And when I enrolled in that school, it opened my eyes to a totally different mindset, exposed me to different things that I would have never been exposed to otherwise. Right? But again, it came with a lot of issues. It came with a lot of trauma. And I remember my 8th grade year was, looking at folks and speaking and having them look at me and go, was that even English? Right? Saying things and it just not resonating with people because we had different experiences, we had different backgrounds. And then having to go home and deal with the things that I was dealing with at home and go back to that and having nobody truly understand either side. And so they're making judgments about me and what I do at home. They're making judgments about me and what I do at school. And it's just like, can I just be a kid? I came here to learn. I came here to do the things that you told me to do to be successful. But why do I feel so much stress, so much pressure? The pressure, the stress, it eats away at us. When we think about first responders, the pressure and the stress from the work to home, home to work, all the different things, it's like all day long. If you can hear, say persevere. Persevere. Yeah, I got to make sure y'all still awake. The stress is hard. A kid told me in 8th grade, he was like, hey, Reggie, what's the difference between a black person and a bag of shit? I ain't like where that joke was headed. The bag, insinuating that black people were merely waste. When I tell y'all about children, they internalize things, and usually those internalizations are negative. And so I'm already feeling like all these issues that I deal with on a daily basis are my fault. And now me as just me showing up, who I am, who I can't change, I'm waste. I'm nothing to you. Cool. So I dealt with that. I dealt with those traumas. But I think one thing to point out, because I see life as gray. Like it's not ever black and white. There's so much gray. So while there was a lot of that trauma, there were some positive things as well, right? There was a guy that I knew who was, he's still one of my best friends to this day, and we bonded during that time. And his family, they bonded with me, and they loved me and supported me so much. But after that 8th grade year, I was like, look, I'm done, y'all. I'm going back to public school, and I want to be around people who understand me, who I can relate to. And this is it. I called my buddy, and I tell him that. He's like, all right, man, I hope I see you in, football season. Hang up. 5 seconds after he hangs up, his mom calls me, "Hey, Reggie, no, please don't go, don't go, don't go." I'm like, "Miss Marsha, you're crazy. I'm out. Love you." Then his dad calls me. He's like, "Reggie, can I come see you?" I'm like, "Sure." So he comes over, and we're sitting in the car. And it was a pivotal moment for me because this big, stoic guy who, pilot, former athlete, just who rarely showed any emotions, looks at me, and he starts to cry. And here I am, rising freshman, thinking, what in the world is making this grown man cry about where this ninth grader chooses to go to school? And he says, "Reggie, we need you. My son's life is going to be better because of you. This environment, this school environment, is going to be a better place because of your presence. Our entire community, our entire world is better off because of the things that you bring to the table. You matter. You have value." And I want to extend that to all of you all, right? The things about your background, the things that you carry shame around, the things that you may not find so pretty about your story, those are the unique things that make you you. And that matters. And that matters. And how can we live a life where we accept that in other people's lives instead of finding the differences and trying to point those out and hate people for those differences? How can we celebrate and embrace them, right? Because those are the beautiful things that connect us as humans. So he said that to me and changed my mind, completely changed my mind. I'm like, I'm back. I'm coming back. And I'm gonna make the most of this. And talk about some other positive things that happened during that time. My grandparents, my dad's mom and dad were angels for me. I think that's the best way to put it. They were my angels. So while there was chaos and trauma at my home with my mom, my grandma, my grandfather, when I went to their house on the weekends and on summers and on breaks, it was nothing but peace. Nothing but peace. I think for a young child, young person, a person in general developing, when you get to see that there is light out there, there is some good things out there, then you start to form this assessment about the world that is not black and white, that it does exist somewhere in the middle, that there can be good things amongst the bad things. So I always want to honor them. I just want to let y'all know about that. But I graduated from that school, y'all. It was a challenge. It was a challenge academically. It was a challenge athletically. It was a challenge in the art, all the different ways. But I did really well. And I had the opportunity to go to any school that I wanted to in the world, in the country. And but I decided I wanted to stay here. Born in Nashville, I didn't want to go east because the colors out there don't look too well. No, I'm just playing. I wanted to stay here. I played in an all-star game at Vanderbilt University when I was 10 years old. Got to meet players, and from that moment, I was like, this is the place I want to be. This just feels like home to me. And so that's what I did. I enrolled at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt adopted me and is home. It's one of my second homes. It was one of the places where I felt at peace again. And I had originally decided I wasn't going to play football. I was tired of the nagging injuries, the pain, all of that. I was tired of that. But then the first kickoff, and I'm like, yeah, I got to be back out there. So I did my thing to get back on the field, to walk on, play for Bobby Johnson and James Franklin, if you remember those names. And I had a blast. We went 2-10. It was so much fun. And then the next year, we went 2-10. So much fun. And then James Franklin came to town, and things started to change. And that was I got the best of both worlds, I feel like. With Bobby Johnson, Bobby was a man who stood up for everybody, right? He stood up for me. I remember as a walk-on, I go to him and I say, Coach, I know I'm a walk-on. He's like, I'm going to stop you there because that is irrelevant. whatever you're about to say after that is totally irrelevant. You're a part of this team just like everybody else. I was like, okay, coach. I just wanted this number because it meant something to me. He's like, I'm going to see what I can do. He didn't make it happen. But instead of having number 43 like all the other walk-ons, I had number 26, which was 3 numbers away from what I truly wanted, and I was like, I can rock with that, right? He was a good man. And it was rumored that he if you remember anything about that time, he stayed around and he worked with his staff by retiring a couple weeks before our season kicked off. And it's impossible to create a whole new coaching staff in the amount of time that he left. And it was said that he did that just to give his staff an extra year to find a job when it was all said and done. He knew he was at the end of his career. And so he's just the man that he was. And then James Franklin comes to town, and I'm telling you, this man could sell water to a fish. Like raid to a bug. That man was a salesperson. He was a coach. He was a player's coach. He was amazing. Like to play for a person like that, like I got an amazing experience. We started to win games, went to bowl games. I think we beat that team from out east with those ugly colors. Yeah. I'm gonna start getting tomatoes thrown at me or something. But no, it was an amazing experience. But I got to the end of my college career, and I didn't really know what I was going to do. I didn't have examples of what it looked like to do career. Right? If I was going into the family business, then y'all would not be hearing from me right now, right? And so I got there, and I'm studying economics, and I'm like, what are you all doing for after school? They're going to work on Wall Street. I couldn't point that out on the map. So I'm like, okay, so how do you work on Wall Street? And you got to have an internship, and you got to know this person and that person. And I'm like, well, look, I don't have any of that. So what do I need to do? Best to go back to school, I guess. So that's what I did. Went back to school. I got my master's degree in accounting from the Owen Graduate School of Business and became a CPA, certified public accountant. Amazing. And I worked in external audit. Somebody, because that's exactly what it is, right? It was riveting work, y'all. Oh man, I was protecting the capital markets. That's what I had to remind myself of. I was in external audit, knocking on people's doors, asking them for paperwork that they didn't get paid to produce for me. And it was just like, hey, this is my job. Don't fight me. I did that for a couple of years, but it just wasn't the work for me. So I was seeking and searching for, what do I do? How do I get into something that feels more fulfilling? And I got into the world of wealth management. Wealth management, 2 words that I knew nothing about. But I got the experience and training from some of the greatest minds in the world of finance. And that's when I really found a passion for what I was doing. I was working to help people build, maintain, create this wealth for themselves that they could pass down to people in their lineage and really change lives. It was amazing. I'm seeing people smile on the other side of me as opposed to walking away from me when I'm walking down the hall. So I'm like, yeah, I like this. I really liked it. I liked it so much that I decided I was going to start my own business doing it. And I called it Rose Creek Wealth Management. And the name derives itself from the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete. Right, through all the perceived impossibilities, the poor soil, little light, no water, that rose grows. And when we see that rose, we don't say, oh, look at it, it's leaning to the side a little bit. It has some damaged petals. It speaks a little ghetto at times. Like, we don't look at that rose and point out those things. We look at that rose and we marvel at the ability to reach the sun through all of that adversity. Its resilience should be celebrated. And I wanted to honor that, not just in my life, but in the lives of so many other people. Everyone say, I am the rose. I am the rose. You all are the roses, right? Because I know that you may not show it. especially as a leader, you may not show the difficulties that you deal with, the adversities, the struggles that you go through, but they're there. They're there, and they look different for all of us, but they're there. But yet you show up. You show up for yourself. You show up for others. And I wanted to celebrate that. And so I did. I celebrated it, and it was celebrated. It was applauded and awarded with so many great honors. I did really well early on that got me nominated for Forbes and got me with these recognitions and things like that. And it was like, wow, this is amazing. But how in the world did I end up on that cold hardwood floor? All of the trauma that I have faced in my life went unaddressed. I met my wife in college, and she introduced me to something called adverse childhood experiences. Right? We got to talking about our upbringing, and it was night and day. The things that I would normalize. Right? For me, it was normal to see a kid dead, or to have a friend who was a kid before he was 18 die. It was normal to have all the drug use that was around me and just that be a part of life. Like, it's Friday night at my uncle's house. What do you mean? It was normal to see someone victimize and brutalize somebody else. Right? Those things were normal for me, but they weren't normal. And her life was totally different. And the CDC and Kaiser Permanente in the 90s did a study on adverse childhood experiences, right? And it looked 17,000 adults and asked them questions, 10 questions that looked at the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect. It looked at household dysfunction, substance abuse, separation in the family. It looked at all of these different areas. And you answer yes or no on this questionnaire for 10 questions. And there I am, I'm checking. And I'm like, damn, I got an A. I originally had 9 out of 10 aces when I first took the study. And I say originally because at the time I carried so much shame around another part of my story that I didn't want to check one of those boxes. And it was shame, but it was also pride, because as a man, sexual abuse at the hands of a woman isn't trauma, right? But I was 4. And I was 6. And I was 8. It's pretty traumatic. And so, 10 out of 10 aces. What does that mean? In the study, they looked at the health outcomes for these adults and saw that your adverse childhood experiences score related to some of the health outcomes that you had in life. And so the higher the score, the worse the health outcome. And this is heart disease, lung disease, absent of, poor lifestyle or behavior. But it also leads to those behavioral things, those high-risk behaviors that we engage in. Substance abuse, suicidality, depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of these rates are increased because of the experiences that you faced as a child that you had no control over. That's why I was on that floor. I didn't have control over those things, but it was my responsibility. It is my responsibility now to start to heal from those things. And when I had that out-of-body experience where I saw myself and I asked, how in the world did you end up here? I woke up the next day and I was like, we got to do something about this. So I went to my primary care doctor. I reached out to a therapist. I reached out to all these different folks that I knew were around and talking about mental health and the support that was out there, but I didn't truly understand it until that moment. If I didn't get help for myself, I would not have been here today. And so I did that, and it was amazing. It was amazing for me to be able to find peace within myself. And I wrote about it, right? I journaled during a chaotic time in my life because I didn't realize it, but that had always been an outlet for me. I wrote about it, and that writing became a book. It became a book called Perseverance Through Severe Dysfunction, PTSD. And that book became a bestseller that is in the hands of thousands and thousands of people telling them my story, my vulnerable story, and I was terrified to release it because you don't tell those stories outside the house. You don't share those things that we have shame around, but outside the house. But in my journey, I've learned that vulnerability is power. There is so much strength in vulnerability. I actually had an event last night for my podcast called Vulnerability Muscle, where I had a panel of folks who expressed so much vulnerability to a room full of strangers for most of them. And leaving that event, I'm still getting blown up with messages about how healing it was to hear another person's story and not feel so shameful around the things that we experienced. There is strength in vulnerability, and I recognize that. And in my research for the book, I learned about a couple of things. I learned about polyvagal theory, right? Stephen Porges talks about polyvagal theory, right? When we know that we've heard of fight or flight. Raise your hand if you've heard of fight or flight response, right? Raise them high, raise them high. Yeah? Fight or flight response, we know that, right? So that's part of polyvagal theory. So in the middle, you have ventral vagal. That is the window of tolerance that we want people in. That's the social engagement, that's the happy, that's the connection, that's the good work, that's the mindfulness. That's where a person is at their best. We want them in the middle. But what happens when our nervous system is scanning our environment and it feels threatened? It feels threatened. It's going to react. And this is our autonomic nervous system, meaning we don't have control over it. It's going to react, and it may go up or it may go down. When it goes up, hyperarousal, that is the fight or flight response. What does that look like? Everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. And if you're able, I want you to jog in place. Jog in place. Jog in place. Jog in place. Yes. Now go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster, go faster. Now imagine there's a bear behind you. There's a bear chasing you, and it's about to eat you up. Everybody, yes, run. You gotta run. That's a bear behind you. You gotta run. Run. All right, now everybody stop. What do you notice in your body right now? A little tired. Heart rate, right? Elevated. Activated. That's that fight or flight response, right? You can take a seat. You can take a seat, right? And we have control over when it's the bear and we're running and we're exercising, right? But when it's the emotions, when it's the abuse, when it's the scary thing in our life that we really can't put words to, we don't have control over it. And our bodies and our minds, it can't really distinguish between a real threat and a perceived threat, a physical threat and an emotional threat. It just fears that it's being threatened. And so we shift from hyperarousal, or maybe the response, the autonomic nervous system's response is hypoarousal. That's the shutdown. Or you may see this like depression. You may see this as that person that even when you tell them a joke, they may crack a smile, but then it's back to, or they just feel disconnected from their bodies. And they don't feel present, passive, no feelings. Maybe there's numbness. Maybe when they think about just all the things, it's too overwhelming. And so their body's rejecting it, dissociate. Right? I point this out because the first responders, they're running every single day. And their heart rates will increase and their nervous system will respond. And when their nervous system responds, it's pumping out things in their bodies that is hurting them. And a lot of them say, 69% of them say, that they don't have enough time to recover. And so while they're still in one of these states, they got to go right back to work. And they got to go right back to work, and they don't have any time to process and calm down and relax and get back to that window of tolerance. And what happens with trauma is you get stuck in these states. You get stuck in these states to where your body operates, and it starts to operate very functionally, right? My whole life, trauma response. It operates really well because that's how it's going to survive. That's how it views things. Part of my research was trying to understand this for myself How do I calm down my nervous system? I start wearing little gadgets that, measure my heart rate when I'm just resting, or measure my heart rate when I talk to my mom, or measure my heart rate when I see something on TV or walk past a neighborhood that okay, it's telling me something. My body's telling me something. And fortunately, I think sports was a huge benefit for me in my life because I stayed very connected to my body. But a lot of times in trauma, our bodies is where the scary stuff is, and so we dissociate from that. And so embodiment became important to me, and I got into yoga. A little PG-13 action, yeah, y'all see. I got into yoga. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, one of the greatest books. If you haven't read it, I highly suggest it. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Said that yoga is one of the most effective forms of addressing trauma that he's seen, more than medication and more than other forms of treatment. And I had been practicing yoga for about 10 years without knowing it. I was like, oh, that's why I'm feeling a little different. That's why I respond a little different. That's why I can come home and relax. I might go to sleep a little quicker than I used to. I might not get as aroused as I used to around that scary thing that happened. It's like, okay, yoga's powerful. I recognized the benefits that it had in my life, and I wanted to extend that. So I became a certified yoga instructor with a trauma-informed focus, because I understand that people come in with all sorts of things, and I can't make assumptions about what they're coming in with. They may look a certain way, they may dress a certain way, drive a certain car, but that doesn't mean that they haven't experienced life. We've all experienced life. And that trauma-informed lens allows me to see humans underneath the firefighter, underneath the HR worker, underneath the police officer. We're humans. And our human bodies respond how human bodies respond to perceived threats. And this was huge for me. It allowed me to heal. It is allowing me to heal as I continue to practice it for myself and deliver that powerful modality to children and folks of all walks of life. It's been amazing for me. And it allows me to address some of the stress that is in my life. And there are stressors in the lives of the first responders, right? I did a poll and asked you all, what do you think is impacting the mental health of you all? And there are a bunch of answers, and you might see some of yours up here, but grief, right? The grief, because they're losing people, because they are seeing people, die. There's exposure to death with the folks that are responding. So much violence. They are stepping into people's lives at the worst time of their life. And they're getting stressed out about it, but they're having to have this level of professionalism that keeps them over here. But again, at the bottom of their job and their profession and their training, there's a human underneath that is dealing with that secondary trauma. The threats of their personal safety, the long work hours, poor sleep because they're still in that state, hyper arousal. They're not having an ability to calm down and relax. And these stressors lead to what? They lead to, I need to calm my system. And what do we see folks do a lot of times? Turn to substances as a way to numb ourselves. Because again, that body is feeling the threat. That body is intolerant. It's in an intolerable state. I don't want to be in here. How do I numb this as much as I can? And this talks about alcohol use, but we know that some of our first responders are administering opioids, other drugs that then they use, then abuse to deal with the stressors that they're dealing with in life. And understanding that this is a human trying to survive, this is a human feeling the threat from their environment. How do we have compassion and grace for that? How do we have compassion and grace for the substance abuse issues that are happening in our society, as opposed to demonizing them? Right? These are humans trying to find peace within. And this is one. Started off as an adaptive way to do it. When you think about how drugs react with the chemicals of our brain, it got them to a place of peace. And if they've never felt that before, they want that again. We want that again. And it turns from adaptive to maladaptive. And it starts to harm us. But we have compassion for them because they're humans. We look at the prevalence of depression and anxiety with firefighters, police officers, and paramedics. And I got this red X over the anxiety for firefighters because there's just very little data on anxiety for firefighters. And I didn't want it to look like there was zero, but there is some. Remember, the paramedics and the EMT workers, they don't go and seek mental health support, but they're dealing with it. They're dealing with it, and they're aware that they're dealing with it. We can do a better job of helping promote and support them going to get the help that they deserve. Think about PTSD. I live with PTSD and complex trauma. First responders meet the criteria for, oh, we're good? Okay. Meet the criteria for PTSD at a rate of 20% compared to 6.8% from non-first responders. And then when you think about mental health conditions that look like symptoms of PTSD, that number is a lot higher. A lot higher. And suicide, I thought this made me cry when I first saw it. Firefighters and police officers are more likely to die by suicide than while on duty. That's a hard stat. That's a hard realization. It's a really hard realization. How do we build a community to where folks don't feel alone in the suffering that they're going through? That they feel supported and going and getting the help that they need so that they don't die by something that is preventable. There are more stats on suicidality here. 47% of firefighters engage in suicide ideation. Police officers are 54% more likely to die by suicide than people in non-law enforcement vocations. This one. Officers who report job burnout had 17% greater likelihood of suicide thoughts than those who didn't feel burnt out. And EMTs were 39% more likely to attempt suicide than other workers. This is a preventable thing if we provide the resources and the help and are there for people in their times of need. Complex trauma. CPTSD, complex PTSD, is not recognized in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Health Disorders, but it's real. It's real. I know, I live with it. I live with it. And part of the difference between PTSD and CPTSD, a big part of it is the interpersonal aspect of it all. Right? CPTSD is the prolonged trauma that we endure throughout our lives. Maybe it's through our childhood, maybe it's through adulthood, in a job like a first responder. Or maybe that childhood, every single day you were going and running away from that bear, every single day. And a lot of times that means the people around you start to make associations with them about how the world operates. And those associations then result in how you think about the people in your future, how you think about your coworkers, how you think about what happened when your water bottle was right here, but now it's not right there. Who stole my water bottle? It's like, oh, your mind went to stole, like it was moved. And as leaders, as HR professionals, as folks who deal with the behaviors of other people while they're in relation to other people, right? How do we have compassion for those who may carry this sense of worthlessness that makes them attack other people, who may feel guilt, who may feel anger, who may have these dysregulated emotions that don't always look normal? They show up to work and they just snapped out of nowhere. I don't know where it came from. We had to let them go. Right? When we do that, what do? We suppress people's humanness, the humanity that is in each and every one of us. Instead of having grace for those moments, instead of asking what happened to you, as opposed to what is wrong with you. How do we shift that language to what happened to you? And have more grace and compassion for folks so that they can start to heal from their wounds. The two parts that distinguish PTSD from CPTSD, the CPTSD has that interpersonal piece tied to it. And then also that negative self-image, that little child who internalized those negative things, and those negative things were never combated with the positive things that our beautiful children possess. And they live with that, and they live with that. And that becomes their trauma that lives in their body and in their mind for the rest of their lives. And so they could be this dynamic keynote speaker. The one has been awarded all of these different things, but then when they look at themselves in the mirror, they're like, who the hell are you? You're not. How do we help people when they're dealing with that so that they can heal from that, right? It takes community, it takes connection, it takes caring, it takes really giving a fuck, right? You can take action. You can take action, right? When we have mental health talks like this one, when we have mental health trainings, when we provide resources for people to learn the psychoeducation around why they may be feeling the way that they do. Not everybody went and studied psychology in school, but it affects us all, right? When you do that, you send a message to people saying that we care about what you're going through. And that it's okay to have these conversations. It's okay to talk. Like I said last night, we had a vulnerable conversation with strangers and people in the community, and people who had never heard a conversation like that are going to walk out and say, there are people out there who care. There are people out there who are experiencing what I may be experiencing, and I'm not alone in this, right? I'm not alone in this. Peer support programs, right? I see y'all clicked up at tables, East Tennessee over here, Spring Hill over here. Like we got cliques in here. I'm funny, y'all, I swear. No, but peer support programs go a long way. Getting people together so that they feel supported with people who understand what they're going through. Right? I may not be able to walk in and say, I understand what you're dealing with as a first responder. But that brother that they do work with, and that sister that they go in the trenches with, they understand it. They know what they're dealing with. They know the things that aren't being said, that aren't being talked about, and they can have a safe space to talk about those things. How do we build those safe spaces? And continue to promote it, right? I tell my story without any clinical training or anything like that. I have a lot of knowledge around this because I've been trying to heal myself. I've been trying to help heal myself, and then in turn, I turn around and I help others. So if it's inviting a speaker to come speak to your folks that look like them, that have experienced life like them, to say, it's not a bad thing that you experience the mental health challenges that you experience. That's not a bad thing. That's human. But how do we heal those things? Because we all deserve to. We all deserve to. Resources. 70% of EMT workers don't want to go to therapy, don't want to go and find resources. How do we make it so easy for them that they couldn't turn it down if they wanted to? Instead of putting the donuts out on the table, how do we put a directory down of people that they can go talk to around different needs that they have? We've got to provide resources for folks. And then a cultural shift in our language, how we talk about mental health. Right? You saw died by suicide. Raise your hand if that's the first time you ever seen the language died by suicide versus committed suicide. Right? Okay. We've been doing some mental health trainings here, huh? I like it. Right? Committed. Committed sounds like a crime. It's a crime that a person felt so intolerable in their life and in their body that they wanted to die. they're hurting. They're hurting. They died by a disease that affected their minds. That if we provide the resources around, that we provide the support, if we treat our mental health with the same respect that we give to our physical health, we start to reduce some of these conditions. The cultural shift in the language. What is wrong with you? What happened? You're human. I understand that you're human, and humans respond in a way to protect themselves. How do we have more compassion for folks? How do we open up the conversation? And I think a big part of this, right, we're talking to leaders here from municipalities all over the state. When do we advocate for change so that folks can have access to the resources that they need? So that from a systematic level, mental health is not swept under the rug. That it's easy to use the insurance that is provided to go in and find a therapist that's going to help you with the needs that you have. Advocate. Stand up for your people. Stand up for yourselves. Because you deserve it. We all deserve it. If I walked in here and I was on crutches and I, had broken my ankle, like we'd look at that and say, oh, he might need some help up these stairs, or he might need he might need surgery, he may need some intervention. But the person that walks around every day dealing with the issues of their mind, of their brain, the organ that is their brain, just like an organ, like the heart, like the stomach, like the liver, it's an organ. Why don't we give that the same respect? How do we shift the culture? I think one step is to model it. If you want to download, there's a ebook here with different tips and tools on self-care for yourselves as leaders. Right? The ebook does some of this. It may be simple for some of you who have already engaged in self-care and understand what it looks like to take care of your mental health on a regular basis. But for some, the things will be, a life-changing experience for you. I like to say self-care is sacred, not selfish. Self-care is sacred, not selfish. Because if you can't show up as your best self, you can't lead folks to be their best selves. And then they can't go out and be their best selves. I messed up on them thems and theirs, y'all. Y'all hear that? Y'all got grace for me? Thank you. I appreciate that. Self-care is sacred, not selfish. It matters. Y'all matter. I told y'all about my grandparents. These are them. These are my angels, y'all. My angels at my graduation from undergrad. My grandmother on the left, my grandfather on the right. I think about 2019, January 1st, my grandmother had just been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer and had a surgery to remove one of the tumors from her brain. January 1st comes around and she's dealing with her brain has just been cut open. She's got all this medication. She's actually overprescribed a medication that has put her into psychosis, and she attempts to take her own life by overdosing on insulin. Her blood sugar dropped to 44, which I knew nothing about blood sugar prior to that, but that was a pretty low level. My dad, he called the EMTs, and this is probably the first time my dad ever dialed 911, y'all. Oh, I'm trying to be serious. But they came, and when I walked in, I saw my grandmother. She was stiff as a plank. She was sweating. Her lips were pursed, and her eyes were poking out of her head, and I really thought I had lost her that day. The EMTs showed up, They were moving with urgency, like they cared, like she mattered. They were moving with urgency, and they got her in the ambulance, and they rushed her to the hospital. And when I saw her being pulled out of that ambulance, she was smiling. She was smiling. I think if those EMTs showed up and they didn't feel like it, they were depressed, they were too anxious to even find the street, they just didn't care that day. They were burnt out on their job, and so maybe that would have looked a little different. Maybe I wouldn't have seen that smile. Maybe when I walk in on my grandfather after he calls me out of breath, shivering and shaking on the floor, it takes 12 minutes for them to show up. 12 minutes that felt like a lifetime, but what if they didn't care? What if their mental health was so bad? What if they felt like nobody cared about them, so why should I rush to this old man? And that 12 minutes turns into 13 minutes. That 13 minutes turns into 15, 20, or however much. And my grandfather lies there and dies. No, they got there in 12 minutes. And they got him in the ambulance. And I remember driving behind this ambulance, and everything went numb. I couldn't hear anything, and all I could do is follow the lights of the back of the ambulance. Follow the lights. Just follow the lights. And I get to the hospital. I'm talking to my grandfather, and he has been revived to a place where he's stable. And that night, I hear the nurse come in and ask him, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how peaceful are you right now? 10. I didn't know he was going to die the next day. But to hear those words, something I'll carry with me forever. And if those 12 minutes had turned into 13, had turned into 20, had turned into an hour, and they didn't get there on time because of the things that they were dealing with, maybe I wouldn't have been able to share one last night, one last joke, one last time of love with my grandfather. So I'm forever thankful for the work that you all do and the work that the first responders do, right? Because it allowed me extra moments with my angels. I thank y'all so much for that. I really do. I appreciate that. Because right now, it's all we have. Because the past no longer exists. And the future never was. Right now, this is it. They ask me why I do what I do, and this is what I tell them. I get on stage and I talk about my pain so that other people may not have to feel it. Because the pain from my past does not dictate the present. And the fear of the future only worries me if I let it. All I have is now, a moment to share with you, to tell you about my past and all the things I went through. Abused and neglected, a lot that's hurt me, but I rise above it and you can too. Just keep working. Take your losses and turn them into lessons. Give grace and give back. That's the way to many blessings. Speak with conviction and love with no conditions. Stand tall, stand proud, and unlearn unhealthy traditions. Follow your passion and believe in your vision. Fall in love with the process and stay firm in your intentions. And trust that the results will be a byproduct of the work. And do not, please, do not bottle up emotions. Because as we know, bottles can burst. Create the life you choose to live and surround yourself with those you love. Give thanks for every breath and linger with every hug. Because all we have is now, this moment, this day. Spread light and love everywhere you go and tell people that's the Tennessee way. Thank y'all. I'm Reggie.